Hello and welcome to the 14th edition of HYPIA Research. HYPIA Research is a community of HYPIA scholars, is multidisciplinary, carries research on polyglossia, has study groups, papers, presentations, and today we will start our initial presentation on the topic with Matias. Matias, you have 15 minutes to summarize the readings, state your critical interpretation, and pose some questions to spark debate. Whenever you're ready.
Well, in this 14th HYPIA Research meeting, we are talking about languages as a hallmark of a society. Since the beginning, humans use language as the main vehicle of communication. Through oral and written traditions, language became pivotal in preservation of their cultural legacy. Languages are a hallmark of human cultural diversity, with over 7,000 recognized languages worldwide. Yet the word's linguistic diversity is currently facing an even greater crisis than its biodiversity, with around half of all spoken languages considered to be endangered. Why should we care about language loss? Losing a language represents the loss of a unique history and a treasured trove of cultural knowledge. Each language is a tribute to the creativity and inventiveness of human minds, a beautiful and fascinating solution to complex communication challenges. Languages carry irreplaceable information about human history and diversification, which can trace patterns of migration and cultural exchange even where other historical evidence is lacking. Most importantly, for many people, language symbolizes cultural identity and belonging. Many groups mourn the decline of unique languages and yearn for competency in languages no longer spoken. Around the world, people are working to revitalize endangered languages as a way of strengthening culture and connecting people to their heritage. There are, as well, some general factors. Each language has a unique history, and each may be subject to particular threats and challenges. In addition to language-specific threats, there may be general factors that impact the vitality of many different languages, such as language transmission, whether a language is learned by children, or transmit from generation to generation, language shift, in terms of factors that cause people to adopt a different language, and language policy, including education and official recognition. Coexistence of regional and national languages. Well, as we surely know, there are different approaches in terms of educational models or in terms of social cohesion. For example, there's a multilingual approach that is the case of Switzerland with German, French, Italian, and Rheto-Romansh. A plurilingual approach that's in the case of Belgium, where at municipal level is strictly in education and administration purposes, strictly either in French or Dutch. And the most countries that have different national regional languages, where the regional languages have underline a process of affirmative action and/or positive discrimination approach, such as Spain with Catalan, Basque, and Galician, or France, in the case of Catalan, Basque, Occitan, Alsatian, Breton, etc. The regional languages of Italy, Lombard, Venetian, Napolitan, Sicilian, etc. In the Netherlands, in the case of West Frisian, Turkey, in the case of Kurdish, and even though with countries with significant minority languages, such as Iran, Russia, India, China, etc. Defending a regional language in a school environment. Well, that's an example. The option of schooling in Catalan, a political decision reached through negotiations of the autonomous Catalan government in the 1980s, puts the school in a pivotal role in the Catalan political project, as well as placing the school in a fundamental position for transmitting the Catalan language to future generations, independently of whether it's the students, whether it's the student's first or family tongue. The explicit objective behind the policy of predominant use of Catalan in the schools is to avoid social fragmentation into two separate linguistic communities, different from the Belgian model, for instance. Minority language speakers are multilingual by nature or by necessity from a young age onwards. Historically, the idea may exist that these communities were monolingual in the past, similar to a common misconception of a country's whole, but in reality, areas such as Catalonia, Basque Country, or even Friesland or Wales, Friesland in the Netherlands or Wales, for instance, have been bilingual or multilingual for 700 of years, at least to some degree. It's interesting to note that speakers of European minority languages such as Basque, Frisian, Welsh, Irish, Scottish, Gaelic, Breton, or Catalan have certain characteristics in common, and they are different from speakers of majority language. One important trait they share is that all become fluent bilingual speakers. Without an exception, they speak at least two, but often three or more languages. For them, being a multilingual speaker is nothing special. It's what they know they are from a young age onwards. Monolingual majority language speakers, in contrast, find only one language in the surroundings and grew up in that language, their mother tongue. Minority language children cannot avoid becoming proficient in their mother tongue, but they become proficient in dominant social language as well. Young minority language speakers may not be aware of concepts such as minority language, dominant language, or international language, but as speakers, they became aware of the social inequalities of the languages they speak from an early age onwards. These young speakers are paying attention to the difference in language choice and to the significance of languages in social relationships. There are several reasons behind language learnings. As Usman Johan said, accordingly, all of us, we have multiple and hybrid identities. First of all, belonging to nation states, I mean, the coexistence of national and regional languages. We also belong to different ethnic groups or communities. For example, the Jewish, the Greek, and Armenian, and the different groups that exist in the diaspora or immigrant communities. Also, all of us, or nearly all of us, we have several kind of religious or cultural affiliation in a different degrees, in the different ways or degrees, regardless if you are an atheist or agnostic, etc. Because all of us, we have also, I mean, a religious cultural background. The migrations, every host country, according to their migration policy, has its own set of rules, its own framework in order to guarantee social cohesion and the globalization and job market pressures. Every one of us, unfortunately, we have to learn also languages of control languages, in order to meet the job market needs. There are four main reasons. There are four main reasons about language and culture suppression and or I mean, there are four main reasons of language annihilation and suppression throughout history, but also in the flip coin, there are four main reasons of language spreading throughout history. First of all, of course, the territorial conquest. The second reason, trade, commerce, and or economical interests. Every conquest means that you get a power nation get some natural resources associated with them. The religion, I mean, that also means religions or religious imposition. I mean, the role of religion to spreading a language in a given era. In terms of language of control, and the cultural industry. The cultural industry in terms of how the power nations keep perpetuating the spreading of control languages throughout cultural industry. And there are also, well, Roger Silverstone, in his book, in 1979 book, Television and Daily Life, wrote a chapter around telling about television and the relation between TV and consumption. The first point is the concept of mercantilism. Consumer goods are judged according to the price they acquire in the market. I mean, consumer goods are not judged by its moral or its utility, but instead according to the price they acquire in the market. For that reason, those goods are dealing with within interchange system. When we put those goods in an interchange system, they acquire symbolic values according to the culture of the buying and selling countries. And those symbolic values, those goods with symbolic values or mean symbols in the form of goods and assets, acquire symbolic values, and within them there are concepts like luxury, ostentation, fashion, and all of that means that when I acquire an expensive good, an expensive asset, logically I am satisfying, we are satisfying social social status, or I mean social needs. And well, the third point is that the TV, the media, and the social networks channel or canalize the discourse, canalize the speech, channel the speech of what's right or what's wrong in that value scale. I mean, the TV is dictating me that which good or which asset I have to buy as a priority in detriment of others. And the point is, which established that scale of value? The cultural industry. The TV, the series, the movies, and all the multimedia material, all the programs, TV and movies that United States is the good guy of the movie. Sorry, in that sense, how the cultural industry
Matias,
also.
Matias,
Yes.
sorry.
I already finished.
We have 1 minute.
Thank you.
Wait for questions. You need to ask questions to spark the debate.
Well, there are two main questions. Mm-hmm. The first question is, I mean, the conquests for good or for bad, I mean, are made a footprint within the nation states, and the point is that if I mean the influence of the nation states and the language of control had exerted an influence among the perpetuating the differences between majority language and minority language. And the second question is, which policies about protection of language, which policies about minority language protection are being held according to the countries who has too much difference between national or majority languages and minority language, which policy or protection status would be much more suitable in order to protect better the minority language? Thank you.
Okay, Matias, the second question, I got it down and I wrote it in the chat, but I don't know what the first question is.
The first question is, how do the territorial conquests throughout history impact within the spreading of majority language or control languages, and its impact in the minority language?
Okay, thank you. Control language, I'm just writing it down in the chat. Versus minority language. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Matias. That was a wonderful presentation. I will now share my screen and we will begin the second part of this meeting, which is the debate, right? Before choosing the topic, we're just going to do the debate. And in this debate, we will have approximately 45 minutes. And I will please ask you to limit your participation to 5 minutes each time you wish to speak. And for you to speak, please use the raise hand function that you can see below, and I will call on you to participate. You might respond to people's questions, pose your own questions, interact in any way that you see fit. And with that being said, we will begin the debate. Who wants to begin? Please raise your hand and I'll go to you. Timothy?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Matias. I'll start with a question relating to the second question about how to preserve languages. Now, I'll be very quick, what would interest me is at what point do those with power say, oh, it's still not worth trying to preserve this language anymore because there aren't enough sort of native speakers of it that they think it's doomed to become extinct. And it's just a question on top of your question, really.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tim. I will add my 2 cents before we go to Matias. I think that a language does not necessarily go extinct because of the inexistence of first language speakers. And that, for instance, Esperanto, even though there are people whose first language is Esperanto, I would argue that Esperanto has survived despite lacking a significant number of first language speakers, right? And yet this is spoken by thousands of people, more so than other endangered languages such as, say, Ladino. Matias?
Well, in my opinion, I think that those minority languages who doesn't have a recognition as a co-official language, or even though doesn't have such kind of protection policy, are deemed to extinction, or they are very vulnerable in the nearby maybe 50 years or 100 years. And that's a great thing of concern, because despite there are such a kind of, when I talk about positive action or affirmative action or positive discrimination, it's a term that I get from the Indian language politics. And I mean, in that sense, that how to perpetuate those differences in terms of major and minor, in terms of extra linguistic concerns, and how, despite that, how to generate some kind of language language protection policies in order to, in order to protect those languages. Even though, not necessarily at a mainstream educational level, but at some kind of educational level. For example, summer schools or several actions that intend to protect and even though to document and to use in everyday life.
Okay, thank you, Matias. Anja?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so firstly, I would just like to say to Matias that you choose a really great articles. I really love reading them. I especially love how this topic of preserving languages as dialect languages or minority languages or languages of immigrants that they're migrated to certain areas, like how in every article it's presented. But I would like to open the question. For example, if I just resume a little bit what I mean, in the first, it was presented a country where a minority language, where the Catalan was spoken, and a lot of migrants from other parts of Spain come, and they had to acquire this language. But nowadays, those minorities represent different nations, different people from different countries. So not anymore Spain. Then in Nigeria, it was told that they tried to somehow save those endangered languages that were spoken in Nigeria, because English is the one that is being used the most. while in the third, I really like how they play with this idea of speaking one language in the countries like Spain, I think in England, like the Basque and Wales, and in Friesland, I think in Germany, how those minority languages are spoken and how do they implement those teachings in the everyday life. So I would like to know from your perspective, what techniques do you think are good in learning and saving those languages? In one of those languages, in those articles, they mention translanguaging. What do you think about that? This is the idea when, for example, they read a poem in one language and then interpret it in another language. So what do you think about it? Maybe techniques and the whole idea of those languages, dialects or the minority languages. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anja. And just before we go, the question is posed to Matias, but anybody can raise their hand and try to contribute to the answer. And before we go to Matias, just wanted to say very briefly that we are discussing the protection of languages within the realm of states, which begs the question of why should the state, or should the state at all, be in charge of the quote-unquote protection of quote-unquote minority languages, right? And so I'm thinking about non-territorial languages such as Esperanto, or diasporic languages, many territories which do not belong to any country whatsoever, like Ladino or Yiddish. So what do you think about the protection of languages that do not adhere to any given state? Who should be in charge of that protection? Matias.
Well, in my opinion, should be the states who have been in charge to protect those minority languages. However, when we talk about languages who doesn't have a nation-state framework, such as community languages like Ladino or Yiddish, or even though languages that doesn't belong to a nation state, well, in that sense, they are much more difficult to create a kind of status of protection. Maybe in those cases there must be academies or institutes that normativize and or establish a standard grammar, or how can I say,
Standardize that language.
An institute of standard language reference, like for example, Institut d'Estudis Catalans, or Euskaltzaindia, India, or even though Academia Nacional de Ladino when it exists. So the point is that those kind of institutes, they can fix a standard and a normative, and to promote actions, spreading actions, regardless if those languages belong exclusively or to a nation state or not, in order to create an identity for those languages.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matias. And I wanted to ask before, since I see no hands raised, I wanted to ask in the meantime, you mentioned an example of multilingual country and another one of plurilingual country. The multilingual one, if I'm not mistaken, was Switzerland, and the plurilingual was Belgium. Could you please clarify the difference between multilingual versus plurilingual country?
Very simple. Any citizen of a multilingual country has the right to be schooled and to be attended their needs, even though at administrative level, in every one of the official languages within a multilingual country. Mm-hmm. That's the case of Switzerland. However, in the case of Belgium, a plurilingual approach, when we talk about plurilingual, we talk about the language of a majority. However, since Belgium that doesn't have a majority language that being imposed within the whole territory, like French for France or Spanish for Spain, since there are not such a national majority that that's an official, that being an official majority, since doesn't exist that majority. The plurilingualism in Belgium is more like regarded as a regional or even as a municipal level. Despite you go to bilingual school in French and Dutch in every part of Belgium, maybe, the point is that when you are dealing with administrative things, you have to do it either in French or Dutch or German, period. And in that sense, Belgium has a strict approach. So but basically the difference between multilingual and plurilingual approach can be resumed as that.
I didn't follow, Matias. Sorry. I tried to understand the distinction you made, but I didn't. It's not clear to me what it is, because I'm saying this because multilingual and plurilingual have been interpreted in a variety of ways. And for instance, it's been claimed by the Council of Europe that plurilingualism is different from multilingualism, in that plurilingualism is multilingualism with democratic values. It's not just knowing languages, but it's also acquiring the values of tolerance that go with that language learning process. Is that the sense in which you're making that difference, that distinction? I don't think so. So that's why I asked the question, because I don't think that is the way in which the texts that you are referring are defining plurilingualism versus multilingualism.
Well, in that case, although I touched those themes of plurilingualism and multilingualism, they are not the key themes that we are dealing in this research. I mean, I mentioned them as part of as part of presenting a problem.
Yes.
But not as defining about multilingualism or plurilingualism itself. However, at language policy level, multilingualism and plurilingualism do represent a key factor. In order to establish a kind of protection. In my opinion, multilingualism can fit better the needs of a country in order to promote the other languages, despite meaning, for example, to speak Guarani in the Patagonia or to speak Catalan in Andalusia, for example. But despite not arriving to those extremes, I think that multilingualism is better in order to protect the minority language needs for protection.
Thank you, Matias. Usman wants to participate.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Matias, for the presentation. Here, I want to present a counter perspective to the protection of minority languages. Not that there's anything wrong with it, there isn't, but that it is something that can be politicized. That is to say that minority groups can use it to extract a surplus from the larger community that they live in. This is what Quebec does. Right, it basically holds the rest of Canada to blackmail all the time, and other countries do that too. This is not about the language issue, because the language issue, one must respect the distinction of sub-communities and communities. What I'm saying is that, like many, if not all things in a society, language can also be politicized to the detriment of the larger group or the state or the community at large. So unfortunately, we must keep in mind that politics can, or politicians can, abuse all sorts of things, including the distinction and the beauty and the remarkableness of any language. What do you think about that?
Thank you, Usman. Well, I believe that this touches upon something that Matias mentioned that is very important, which is positive discrimination, right? Yes. Minoritized languages, which is different from minority languages. So let me first introduce this distinction. When we say minority languages, it makes it look as though that status of minority is intrinsic to the language. Minoritized languages, that collocation seeks to highlight the fact that the minority status of a given language is part of a political process. So right now, this language X is minoritized, but there is nothing intrinsic to that language that makes that minority status necessary to that language. It doesn't have to be that way. And so positive discrimination, right, seeks to redress that imbalance between one predominant language and one minoritized language. It can be weaponized from the minoritized community against or at the expense of the majority community. But from the positive discrimination perspective, the question is that a bad thing? Right? So the fact that the minoritized community of speakers is lobbying their way into empowerment, it can get abusive. It can turn into a blackmail, the case of Quebec, etc. But it can also be a positive way of going about fighting social inequality. What do you think? And when does empowering end and blackmail begin? Right. That will be an interesting question too. Because many people could argue that in Catalonia, that is something taking place. So it depends on your political perspective again. If you're a unionist or a Spanish nationalist, then anytime somebody campaigns for Catalan at schools, it doesn't matter if it's 2 hours or 5 or 10 hours per week, it's going to be seen as blackmail. Whereas from the Catalan empowerment perspective, there is not enough amount of hours that are equivalent to the effective empowerment of Catalan, because it is still a minoritized language vis-a-vis Spanish, regardless of how many hours become compulsory in Catalan in schools, right? So.
Well, the same occurs with, for example, Marathi in India, where
please raise your hand if you wish to participate, because otherwise we have several people at the same time. So raise your hand and I'll go to you. Now, Matias, go ahead.
We cannot hear you.
Nawel first, and I came immediately after Nawel.
You want to go first now, or you want to let Nawel speak first, Matias?
I will let Nawel speak first, and then I can immediately after.
Okay, so go ahead, Nawel.
No, I personally feel that governments are prone to not to take account the language care needed for languages to survive. So I guess that multilingualism is one way to improve language preservation conditions. So groups like HYPIA or maybe institutes help with spreading of the knowledge that is related to the empowerment of language learning process.
Mm-hmm. Thinking, well, yes, that can be an alternative to the action of the states when it comes to minoritized language preservation. Organizations such as HYPIA, which do not fit narrowly in any state whatsoever, do not have any state ascription, as a matter of fact, can also contribute to that. Matias.
Well, I just point out that also is the case, for example, Marathi with 73 million, that's minoritized from the Indian state, even in that situation, that how can a language with more speakers than inhabitants has in Argentina to be regarded as a minoritized language? That, just for citing an example, or for example, Tamil in both Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka. But I mean, the point is that how a language where in some, or even though in Kurdish, that if one single language with no recognized states in the Kurdish language with 21 million speakers, how can we detect even though 3 or 4 different language policies according in which territories they speak? For example, in Iraq, the Sorani Kurdish, it has somewhat recognition, but in the northern Kurmanji in Turkey, it's very oppressed, and even though until 2002, it was directly banned from the media.
Thank you, Matias. I think you point out to something very important, which is what are the criteria upon which the minoritized status is determined? Because the simple answer will be, well, the number of speakers. But as you're showing, there seems to be a mismatch between the number of speakers and how minoritized that language is considered to be, right? 21 million speakers, Kurdish, is minoritized language. It's minoritized language insofar as it is the language of a minoritized community, which does not mean that the language per se is severely endangered, right? But I think that it's important at any rate to bear in mind that any language is the expression of a community of speakers. So if the community of speakers is endangered, then the language is also endangered, even if it's not directly in terms of numbers of speakers, right? So you could argue that Kurdish is actually endangered because the community of speakers is in a vulnerable position, even though it's in the tens of millions. Similarly with Quechua, for instance, right? Quechua also has millions of speakers, but in general, it is seen as endangered as, say, Ladino, even though Ladino is just spoken by 50,000
Well,
people.
also Quechua.
Matias, please let me finish, and then I'll go to you. So yeah, again, an imbalance. Why is because Quechua is the language of an indigenous community that is a minoritized community in the country, right? So, okay, so just those two examples. Matias, please go ahead.
Also, Quechua has an imbalance between the number of speakers and the countries who offered several protections, because in Ecuador, the 3 million speakers of Quechua enjoys much more protection at state level in order to protect local Quechua dialects, rather than in Peru, for example, or I mean, in Bolivia has even much more protection in Ecuador, and Ecuador much more protection in Peru. Whereas Peru has the most amount of speakers of Quechua with nearly 15 million, with nearly 8 or 9 million. Mm-hmm. Just for citing an example, that the amount of speakers that has nothing to do with the language policy in each state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Matias. Who else wants to contribute? I think Anja posed an important question about ways of going about preserving those languages, right? And we already commented some of them, which include like state protection. But before I delve into this idea, I have a message from Nawel in the chat who asks, what is the binary, right? Minoritized language versus minority language. That's the binary. So what I'm saying is that minority language, which is the label most often used in mainstream media, can and should be problematized in favor of minoritized language, because the minority status of any given language is not intrinsic to that language, but changing depending on a complex matrix of political circumstances. So techniques to preserve and ways of preserving those languages that do not necessarily imply the state. We mentioned the state. We also mentioned non-state organizations such as HYPIA. Does anybody else have any suggested summer schools? Any other suggestions? Fabian?
Yes, sorry, but I don't know how to raise my electronic hand. So I raise my physical one.
Yeah, okay. With reactions, raise hand. Reacciones,
yeah. It's in reaction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think one of the main options to preserve a language is within the family, right? Because in the family, they should speak the language and be encouraged to speak it inside the family and outside the family. Just a few minutes ago, you talked about Quechua. I used to teach at a rural school where I had a lot of Bolivian children, and they didn't want to speak Quechua, although they knew how to, but they felt ashamed because they thought that speaking Spanish was better than using their own language outside their family. So I think that's family, the one or the best option to encourage people to speak their own language and not to lose that the richness of their culture and language.
Okay, thank you, Fabian. That's a very interesting idea. And before I go to Anja, yes, but it's also been the case in my experience that some of the most prolific activists in the defense of minoritized languages themselves refused to teach that language to the kids because there was a social stigma, because they were afraid that they would not integrate in society. And so family is crucial, but in reality, because family members care so much about the well-being of each other, it can also reproduce social inequalities outside the home. Well, go to Anja, and then Fabian, you'll have the chance to answer, and then Tim. Anja.
So I wanted to agree with Fabian Alonso. Yes, I definitely think also that in family it's one of the most important places when the person can establish the knowledge of a language, but also what is very important is society itself, how you perceive this language, as you, Carlos, mentioned, as something that can stigmatize you, or something that where you feel accepted, where you feel free, when you can express yourself. So not just society, but also some sort of media and the language in which all the television programs and radio programs are presented. So somehow, not just the person itself, because you decide whether you want to learn it or not, your family, because either they support you or not, but also society with all the support they give you, with the possibility to study or not in these languages. So I think everything is sort of important, and we have to put everything into, we have to think about everything and put everything into, well, to think about how important everything is. I'm sorry, I thank you for.
Oh, sorry, thank you, Anja. Yes, how do we conceptualize that language? What stigma does it carry? What values are attached to that language? Now, Fabian, and then Tim.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, with Carlos and Anya. And yes, I now remember that it happens with all immigrant kids when they come into another country, because their parents, for example, we have here in Argentina, we had a lot of immigrants coming from Italy, but their children didn't speak Italian because they wanted to speak Spanish to be fit in this society where Spanish is the national language. So that is what happens also with the Bolivian kids or the Paraguayan kids who don't speak their side languages, so to speak, right? They don't speak Quechua, or they don't speak Guarani. They feel ashamed if they want to. If you ask them to speak that language. Yes, I agree totally with you. Right. Thank you.
I think Carlos froze, so maybe you can continue. Whose turn is it, Timothy or Matias?
Well, actually, Fabian just made the point that I wanted to make. He drew a parallel between children of migrants from another country and how they retain their parents' language or don't retain it. And I know there's a difference in the two situations. So, for instance, if an Italian child comes to Argentina, I guess that although Italian may be a minority language in Argentina, it is still a majority language in another part of the world. So that's maybe a difference between the situations that we've been mainly talking about in this debate. But looking at it optimistically, are the secret that there may be some successful initiatives to enable children of immigrants to keep speaking the language of their parents, and maybe the secrets to maintaining endangered indigenous languages are to be found in the in the ways that certain communities have been able to keep speaking their languages even when they've migrated to another country. I'm just thinking of Chinatowns, for instance, and these, but I can imagine that you probably need a critical mass in order to keep this going. And also, I guess there's another important difference, is that some immigrant communities are replenished from people from the foreign country, which is not the case for indigenous languages, I guess. But still, I'm trying to looking at optimistically. Maybe we can use the lessons of the migrant communities in order to protect indigenous languages.
I agree. Who is next? Matias?
Yeah, it's very important what you have said, Timothy, because we have to raise awareness to our own heritage language, despite living in a language whose local national policy is restricted or even though suppressed. It's true that a lot of countries, in order to guarantee that social cohesion, encourage that everybody to speak the national language. However, the heritage language or even the regional language also have to be encouraged. I remember one of the fellow HYPIA members, Milan Praszmowska-Toporowska, who is British subject of Polish heritage. She is the daughter of a British father whose both parents, her both paternal grandparents were Polish, and a Polish mother who's at the same time son of a Polish father and a British mother. I mean, a dual citizen. Despite that, their parents, they didn't taught her English, Polish. In order to integrate into the English schools, they didn't teach her Polish. However, she decided to learn Polish in the adulthood. Why? Because she was aware about her heritage. Well, that's the point that I feel very proud of her. But just an example.
Thank you, Matias. I just want to add that you might be aware of your heritage and want to reconnect, which also happens a lot in the case of Ladino. But just because you don't want to reconnect, it doesn't mean you're not aware, right? You might be perfectly aware and yet decide not to learn the language of your cultural heritage, right? So that's always a personal decision. Anybody else? Because we actually are in the last minute of the debate. The last 4 minutes should be for deciding the next topic. So if somebody wants to make a final comment, Anja, did you raise your hand? Maybe you want to say something?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to add on the Timothy's question of how can we keep speaking those languages in foreign countries, to keep learning our children, those languages of their inheritance in foreign countries. Maybe this could be interesting topic, or maybe for the next time, or maybe we can conclude something on those. techniques or
Right.
methods.
Thank you, Anja. Yes, unless somebody wants to answer directly to this and very briefly, we will move to the next topic part of the meeting. So I will now go to the next topic. Before, these are some of the options that we have on screen, but before voting on any of these, we can just start by suggesting new topics if you do have any. Because so far, I think you can all see on the screen that we have 4 options, right? Language and geopolitics, polyglot sole ownership companies as a privatization of commons, why locals respond in English when addressing their local language, and translation in literature vis-a-vis other types. But if somebody has a new topic that they feel strongly about, particularly new members who have never presented before, I'm talking about Fabiana and Noel, then you're very much invited to come forward and suggest a topic. Anja says, how to keep speaking your, I'm going to have to say native language or maternal language in foreign country. It's all the categories that I don't believe in. Okay, how to keep speaking your native language or maternal language in foreign country and how to teach it to your children. Okay, says maybe. Okay, we'll add that as an option. I wouldn't vote for that. We'll add that as an option. Okay, anything from Noel or Fabian?
Well, in my case, I would love to write something about translation in literature vis-a-vis other types. I don't know what other types, what it refers to, but it would be interesting.
It could be like a juridical translation, medical translation, you know, in that sense, different genres. Okay, yeah, Fabian?
Yes, I was researching about the origin of languages and the evolution of language because I thought I had to write the article. So
no, this is not about writing the article ourselves, though you can do that too.
Yeah, yes, but it's going to take a long time if I have to write it. So I've been investigating, researching about different authors. Okay, but I have nothing. I have only my own notes.
Right, but you need not have written something about the topic in which you want to present, and so it suffices for you to choose 3 readings about that topic in which you're interested in writing that article without having written the article, and just disseminate those readings that might help with your own writing, and for us to debate and read those.
Okay, and one more thing, may I? I think topic B has to do with what we have just discussed, polyglot ownership companies after privatization companies. Because if you don't speak the language of the company, you are not going to get a job there.
Yeah, absolutely. So now for voting purposes, we're going to do the following. You have 4 options there, and to those 4 options, we're going to add Anja's suggestion. Okay, so letter E would be Anja's how to keep speaking, blah, blah, blah. You have it in the chat. Letter F would be Fabian's suggestion on the origin of languages. And then we will vote. Okay, and depending on the topic, then we will choose the presenter. For instance, if the topic is translation in literature vis-a-vis other types, then we go with Noel, who already volunteered for that. Okay, but otherwise we might have a different presenter. So please cast your vote. A, B, C, D, E, or F. Please, only one letter. One letter per person. Guzman and team, for early birds. Noel just voted. I'm going to choose. I'm going to vote B. A. It's a lot of diversity. A lot of minoritized votes. So we have 2 A's, 2 F's. Is there anybody left to vote? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, we've all voted. So we have a draw between A and F. So now all of us are going to write either A or F.
Balotage.
Yes, like in the French elections. So either A or F, either Macron or Le Pen.
Hey,
Okay. Wait, A or F? Fabian, is it A or F? Because you wrote two. You wrote both of them. So which one you chose, Fabian? A or F?
Sorry, I voted A for the first
Yes.
and F for the second.
You can only vote one, A or F.
Yes, I vote 8 when you made the first selection, and F.
Okay. So F for the purpose of this round. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we have 4 Fs, 2 As. So we're going with F. We're going with the origin of language. So I'm assuming that unless somebody opposes to this, the presenter will be Fabian, because he already expressed interest and he hasn't presented, unlike the rest of us except for Noel. So unless Noel objects to this, Fabian will be the next presenter. Is that okay, Noel?
yes, of course.
All
Let
right.
him speak.
All right. So let Fabian speak. So Fabian,
Very interesting.
you choose 3 readings. You can also choose a video instead of a reading if you want, but 3 documents, and please send those documents to me at least 1 week in advance of the last weekend of the month, of the last weekend of October. Okay, so I can share.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much for this productive conversation. I'm looking forward to the next meeting. Thank you, Matias, and everybody else for the debate. Have a
Thank you,
lovely
guys.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Carlos,
Yeah.
just one quick thing to discuss with you if you have 1 minute.